Hello everyone, I'm Tari Mubarak. I'm a real estate solicitor and a consultant. A lot of you know me already, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time with myself. I'm going to jump straight into it. You don't need to take pictures of this because I've just shared it in a WhatsApp group. If you're not in the WhatsApp group, why aren't you? Speak to TJ, speak to Benny, and please join, and then you'll have access to the slides as well. So I just want to put this up because both of these, the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act and the Renters' Rights Bill, the current version, went into Parliament around the same sort of time in 2024, in March and in May. And one is obviously much more advanced than the other. The Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act is already passed into law, although I'll come on to explain that not all of it has been implemented yet, whereas the Renters Reform Bill and the Renters' Rights Bill now is still plodding along in Parliament. There is one common theme with these two legislation. Does anyone know what it is? Anyone wants to volunteer a guess? Yeah? Anyone else? There is a major shift moving power away from landlords to tenants or lessees. Both the legislation has their common theme. The shift is very much to empower the occupiers, the lessees and the tenants, rather than the landlords. So you guys all be screwed. I'm sorry. So there is this major shift. However, one has moved along much more quickly than the other because it's a bit more complicated with regard to the renters reform, right? So there's a lot of issues there. I've listed some of it at the bottom. But having said that, even with the leasehold reform, not all of it has been implemented yet. Some of the headlines have been implemented, but not more of it. Partly because if you think about some of the impacts I'll come on to, it does actually affect a lot of revenue for example, social housing, for local authorities, and so therefore they've slowed that down somewhat. They've not implemented all of it just yet because they want to see what the impact is. They should have probably done that at the beginning as an impact assessment, but they're doing it now. If I'm going too fast, just throw a fruit at me because my wife has said to me, you speak too quickly. So if I am going too fast, please, I think there was a fruit outside, just throw that at me and I'll slow down a little bit. Now, with regard to this whole reform, it is really very much a revolution. This is one of the major changes that we've seen in leasehold law for quite a long time. So there is a big change. Now, some of the changes include, for example, on houses, we can't have leasehold anymore. Remember in the Midlands, you used to get some leasehold houses. That's all been banned. You can't have leasehold houses anymore. There are some exceptions, for example, like retirement homes, that sort of thing, social housing to a certain extent. But generally speaking, no more leasehold on houses, right? Didn't make sense then, doesn't make sense now. Lease term extension, that's going to go to, it's not there yet, but it's going to go to from 90 years presently. So the way it works at the moment is if you're extending your lease term, you add 90 years on to your existing term. So for example, if you bought a flat which has got 56 years left on it, you'd add 90 years to it. And because I've got an accountant, I think that's 146 years. Is that right? Yeah? So now you'll be adding on, once it becomes law, 990 years, making it effectively virtual freehold. Right? So there's this shift to move away from leaseholds. It's only taken them over 100 plus years to get there. I'll explain why in a minute. But it is that shift is happening, that feudal relationship is being removed effectively. And when I say feudal relationship, are you guys following why I say that feudal relationship? Because this landlord and tenant relationship came about from very historical times. The aristocracy used to own the land, and then the resident people used to work the land, and it's the tenants, and so that relationship is becoming destroyed effectively. The ownership requirement to enfranchise or extend your lease term, so you needed to have owned the property for 2 years before you can extend the lease term. That's been removed since January 2025. As soon as you bought it, you can extend your lease term, and you can also enfranchise as well. So that 2-year requirement for ownership is no longer there. Service charges and administration fees, there's a big point of contention. I'm looking at you, TJ. Certainly for a lot of leaseholders, there is a lot of issues with regards to service charges. That's all going to become a little more streamlined. It's going to be a lot more fairer. There's going to be a redress scheme. I'll come on to that. And so it is actually improving the situation for a lot of leaseholders and owners. One of the things that is going to be a big shift, so I'll come on to, is the removal of hope value and marriage value, which is going to be a big impact. I'll come on to that in a minute. So here's a little bit of a timeline in terms of where we've gotten to. 24th of July is when the rent charges changes came into force. So one of the big issues with regard to a number of leasehold properties was rent charges, which meant that sometimes you had these unknown charges there for quite some time, and it was causing some issues when it comes to refinance or sales. That has been implemented from July. January 2025, as I mentioned, the 2-year ownership requirement has been removed. So a quick segue, Sam was alluding to this earlier, we bought a repo a few years ago. It was 56 years left on it, which is why that number stuck in my mind. And we bought it on a bridge, and we exited onto a commercial permit when the bridge expired. But we still hadn't done the 2 years because they had the board, when you buy from a repo, they don't serve Section 42 notice. They don't want to serve the Section 42 because if you fail to complete, it becomes their problem. So they never serve the Section 42 notice. Now, of course, that's not really an issue because you can buy and immediately serve the notice and extend the lease term. So it doesn't stop you. In that situation, what we did was we went on to a commercial mortgage we can still do on a short lease term, waited for another 1 year. Once we got 2 years, then we went through the statutory process. During that first 2 years, we were still trying to negotiate with the landlord. The downside with doing it that way is the landlord still asks for a higher premium. Whereas when you do it on the statutory route, you get a lower premium usually, and you also pay in peppercorn rent as well. Black peppercorn rent is still there. It's been a while as well. Changes to right to manage from March, that came into force. So we actually increased the non-residential element. So it's a bit counterintuitive. So before, it needed to be 75% had to be resi in a building. You think about a mixed-use scheme, 75% had to be resi for you to qualify to do the right to manage. Now that's been reduced to 50%. So long as 50% of it is resi, you can exercise the right to manage. There's some nuances in terms of what happens with the commercial element, but it's much easier for your mixed-use schemes as well. Future dates yet to be announced, but probably will be in this year, probably in the second half of 2025. We will see implementation of the removal of the marriage value and hope value, which will be a major impact in terms of valuation. We are all very much looking forward to that. On that way. Ban on leasehold houses, as I've mentioned, there are some exceptions, and the enforcement, which is going to be by the Office of Fair Play, is going to be quite hefty if you do it wrong. I don't think anybody's really going to be risking it, but the fines would be fairly massive. So try not to risk it. Here's a little pyramid structure of where I think for investors it's important and how it's going to be implemented. So peppercorn rent, that's at the bottom. That's already been implemented. The non-residential element I mentioned to it, no waiting period. That's important. 990 years. That's going to be a big factor for us. I think a lot of people will be very happy with the 990 years extension as soon as it comes in. Hasn't been brought into play yet, but it will be. And then finally, of course, is going to be the change to the valuation methodology. So everybody here familiar with the marriage value 80-year magic number? So once you go below 80 years, your valuation jumps up. I'm not a surveyor, but it's very a huge jump in terms of valuation. That is going to be removed. So there is a major impact with valuation. So a lot of landlords at the moment are very eagerly encouraging their lessees to extend their lease term on a negotiated basis, because once it's implemented, that premium is going to drop massively. Now, if you speak to a lot of surveyors, they're like, we don't know what the impact is going to be. So if you ask them the question, should we do it now or should we wait? It's tricky. Nobody's really got a good answer for that. It really depends on your situation. If you've got a fixed term that is coming to an end and you need to remortgage, more than likely you need to extend now rather than later. But if you've got time on your hand, you probably want to wait, because if you do wait, whenever they implement that, which very likely will be the second half of 2025, maybe first quarter of 2026, that valuation methodology will change. The premium that we pay will be considerably lower. It'll be therefore cheaper to do. A few other things there. The enfranchisement rights have been expanded, as I mentioned. And then, so the usual rule used to be that if you could only exercise your right to claim the lease extension or acquire freehold once in a 12-month period. Now, why would you do it more than once? Is maybe you got the notice wrong, there was a technical issue with it, and then you have to wait, there's a cooling off period. That's been removed as well. So if you get it wrong, you can just go back and move it again. So previously, if you had a shared ownership lease, you could not have lease extension rights, but now that's going to be included as well. So if you, I don't think it affects a lot of you guys, but if you, some of your tenants had shared ownership leases, that might they might gain those rights as well. And then any disputes will now be down to with a specific tribunal, which is the first tier tribunal, and that's quite a good forum for it to be in. It's much better than court system, which is clunky and very procedural. Tribunals are a little bit less formal, but they get the job done much more quickly as well. Right to manage is being expanded, as I mentioned. So the requirement for residential element drops to 50% rather than the 35%. Now you, as the RPM owner, are only liable for costs where you'll be acting unreasonably, where before you had to sort of pick up most costs, even on the landlord. Now it's quite specific. So that's about narrower as well. I mentioned about the triangle jurisdiction, and then with the cost, with regard to the each party bearing their own costs as well, is making it a lot easier. Before, what used to happen is you used to pick up landlord's costs as well. Now each party picks up their own costs, which I think is going to be a lot easier, because what landlords used to do, not surprisingly, is actually inflate about the cost of the lawyers and the surveyors used to say, oh, okay, this is a blank check, so we'll just rack up the costs of that listing. So that's changing as well, becoming much more fairer. I'm going to whiz through this because it should be fairly obvious in terms of what it says on the tin, but it's going to be a lot clearer, much more transparent to have to operate leaseholds in terms of lessees. You'll get more visibility, more transparency in terms of accounts, service charges, and all that sort of fun stuff. I want to move on actually to very quickly the Commonhold, because I think this is going to be a major change. It is a white paper at the moment. It is still in consultation phase, so it's not going to be implemented just yet, but there is this big shift towards away from leaseholds, and Commonhold is going to be the new thing that will replace leaseholds. It's a white paper, as I said, but it's very likely that new legislation will be introduced in the second half of 2025, and we will see the shift. Now, I mentioned earlier about this, it's really taken them about 100 years. When good old Britain was still an empire and they ruled Commonwealth, they had implemented this. You could not usually have leaseholds in a lot of Commonwealth countries. You had this concept called strata title, which is what Commonhold is right now. And so for a lot of those countries, you have Commonhold, and it's only taken the UK about 100 years to implement what they implemented in the Commonwealth about 100 years. So we'll get there in the end. So just to recap, this is not new legislation, by the way, right? So remember the good old Gordon Brown and Tony Blair, when they came in, they introduced Commonhold. So this is not new law. This has been on the statute books for several years. It's just not very popular. So the Labour government now wants to make it popular. In fact, it wants to make it the default. And there are some benefits for doing it that way. So just to recap, with Commonhold, each individual owner
gets effectively a freehold of their unit. So if you are an owner of flat A in number 1 Priory Street, you will have a freehold for that unit rather than a leasehold. And then everybody else, you plus everybody else, gets a share in a Commonhold association for the common parts. And then there will be some rules governing how the common areas are to be governed and all that. Sounds very similar to leasehold, actually. It doesn't. The difference being you don't have to extend your lease term, you don't have to pay a premium or a ground rent towards your lease, and so it makes it a lot easier. There will be shared management. You will have a right straight away. So a bit like when you buy a share of freehold in a freehold owning company, you will automatically get a right in the Commonhold Association. So you will have an automatic right in the management of the common areas. There will also be enhanced protection and standardized rules as well. Let me just come on to what the white paper now says. So it will become under the white paper, the proposal is by the government to make this the default. So there will reach a point in time, maybe in the next few years, when you will no longer be able to issue leaseholds for flats. And that's a pretty big shift. Commonhold, as I said, has been on the statute books, but it's not been very popular because it's been a little bit clunky. And a lot of lenders still don't understand it, and it therefore don't like, I'm not the kid, you just solely play, but most lenders don't quite understand it and therefore prefer not to lend on it. And so it's not been very popular for developers to implement. Plus also from a developer's perspective, that holding on to that freehold for a residual value and getting some additional bites of the cherry in terms of additional premiums has been quite lucrative, because now that that's all will go out the window. So they are trying to address in the white paper some of the problems that the Commonhold had. So it will include, for example, some standardized documentation in terms of how the Commonhold association will be set up, how it will be run, some of the forms that you use, all of that will be standardized and streamlined, making it a lot more easier. As I said, this will become the law. So I think, as developers, you guys need to get used to the idea of setting Commonhold interests in the not too distant future. Now, one of the concerns that, one of the problems that the Commonhold had was with regard to mixed-use schemes. What about the situation where you've got, for example, like Manny and Anna's side, we've got ground floor commercial and Resi uppers. What happens in that situation? Because the freeholder still wants to maintain the commercial element. What happens in that? So now the white paper doesn't give you the details. They haven't worked that one out yet, but they say we are going to address it. So there will be some resolution to that mixed-use scheme. But as I said, there is that shift towards Commonhold. So as I mentioned, there will be a ban on leasehold flats. The timeline hasn't been given yet, but if you look at the white paper, there is a very, very clear shift towards banning, not existing ones, but new ones. So existing ones will eventually just run their course, subject to the Leasehold Freehold Reform Act, but any new flats at some point in the next few years can only be sold on Commonhold rather than leasehold. That's it. I think I've done it within time. We're doing Q&A session at the end. But if you want to reach out to us, that's us. Pedro's here as well. Put your hand up, Pedro. So Pedro's also part of STM Consultancy. If you guys want to have a come and chat with us, and we're doing Q&A at the end. Thank you very much.